Yes, sir.
Hi, John Wojciechowski from Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington. My question, sticking with you, Brian, is about offshore wind training for offshore wind industry. Being at the community college level, I want to know how you envision the training is going to happen for this industry when it comes to North Carolina. Is it going to be, do you foresee it going to be a privately based training or an industry-based training, or maybe one that happens more at the college level? I see a lot of training happening for large-scale wind in, say, Iowa, and a lot of it happens at the community college level. I just want to know how we can prepare for that transition here in North Carolina, especially where we are on the coast.
Did everyone hear that question? Do I need to repeat that? Okay. That's a good question. My personal view is that the community college system and the university system are going to play a very central role in training our workforce for offshore wind. I think it's a more efficient way to do it. In terms of preparation, I think what I would say, I certainly won't stand up here and say that I'm a workforce development training expert. That's all of you. But we have some models that we can look at. So I would look at what's being done in the UK, where they are full bore into building these, have already started building these workforce training programs and are announcing new ones pretty regularly. I would look to that as a model. And there are also some universities in the US who have announced workforce training programs for offshore wind. I believe the University of Massachusetts, University of Delaware, University of Toledo, and there's one other. But I guess in terms of preparation, I would look to more to the UK in terms of what's being done there, because they're ahead of us.
There are also some great programs in the Midwest. Grand Rapids Community College in Michigan has, I think, one of the only, if not the only, wind turbine technician service training that includes a lot around the safety. And so they're actually providing that training to technicians from across the country and even from across the world. So that's they're part of our Greenforce initiative in Michigan. We'd be happy to connect you with those folks. You can learn about some of the work that they're doing. And what college are you with, sir? Here you go. A colleague right here in your state to talk with over lunch to you about some of this work. Opportunity to connect. I want to go back to something that you said, Paul, and pick up on what you also said too, Joy. You talked a lot about the opportunity of growth in energy efficiency and construction, even though we know that lags a little bit. And I was struck by that because Carly and I had the pleasure of being on a radio spot yesterday, talking to some of the Eastern North Carolina residents, and there was a gentleman on the call who was a former tradesman, who is a tradesman who's unemployed, and he was really struggling with the sense that there's all this potential growth in terms of energy efficiency, yet I can't find a job. So what's the disconnect here in terms of really leveraging folks who even have skills already to actually meet some of the demand that you say is out there?
There are three things that have stood in the way of this industry taking off, and one is that the public is not informed, and even if they know what a retrofit is, they don't really know where to go for authoritative information that would allow them to make informed decisions about who to hire and what to do. The second thing is there aren't enough skilled folks to perform the work that to meet the demand that is expected. And the third thing, which is probably the largest right now, is that the upfront costs can be daunting because of the economy. So even if it's a smaller measure that might only cost $1,000 for some people, they just don't have it, they can't borrow it, and therefore they can't pursue these measures, even though over time there would be payback. And there are some pilot programs that are being tested around the country for power saver loans, which would be low interest loan programs that would allow people to would give them help with the upfront costs. And in our area, Progress Energy is offering some fabulous rebates for a number of different types of retrofit improvements. But those would be the three things that, and a lot of, I should add this, a lot of folks got geared up and ready to get to work in this industry in anticipation of some policy initiatives that didn't take place. And one on the federal level was something called Home Star or Cash for Caulkers, which would have incentivized that market in much the same way that the solar industry has been incentivized. And that's not likely to happen now because of the changing climate in Washington. And other state initiatives have not taken off yet either. So a lot of folks have built their business plans and taken training in anticipation of these things happening that have not.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Bill Miller from College of Paul, and Brian and Paul, I believe are you both lobbyists, or does your organization lobby in the General Assembly?
My organization is a lobbyist principal, but I personally am not a lobbyist for the organization.
What are the objectives for the organization in the General Assembly? Who have you had for support, and where is the opposition? And what are you hoping to accomplish overall?
So for this session, some of the things we're looking at is, I showed you that map of all the solar installations, and I talked about the REC as the way that the utilities meet compliance. To go into a little more detail about the law that was passed in 2007, there's 3 set-asides or explicit carve-outs for technologies. One is for solar, one is for hog waste, and one is for poultry litter. Around the solar set-aside, our utilities have collected a lot of solar recs at this point, and they don't need any more until about 2014 or 2015. So we're anticipating a pretty big drop in the demand for new solar. So that has the solar folks concerned. So one of the things we're looking at is we've done analysis, the price of solar since 2007 install costs, based off of all those filings that we looked at. We're looking to possibly bump up that carve-out a little more in solar to keep that industry going. I mentioned third-party sales. That would be applicable to solar or small wind or some way for people, entrepreneurs, to come up with business models to sell electricity. You cannot sell electrons unless you're a public utility in North Carolina. Building codes on the energy efficiency side is another thing that is on our agenda but doesn't have any traction this year. To orient folks, if they're not familiar, building codes are developed on a 3-year cycle in North Carolina. There's a big, long political story, lots of initial support to increase the energy efficiency in building codes at the beginning of last year. At the end of the day, that was pulled out, and some compromise was come to, but because of some procedural items, it's not going to take effect. And in essence, a law, the entire building code for energy efficiency would have to be put into law and passed by the General Assembly, which we don't think is going to happen. So those are the type of things that we're looking at right now. Smart grid is another place where we're looking at some activity from the state of North Carolina. But in general, we look for opportunities to have public policy advance this industry in a responsible way. So we take into account what is the job impact, what is the rate impact. We look at low-income households to make sure that across the spectrum of ratepayers, what is the challenge or impact there. And a lot of years it comes down to what is politically feasible. Something that we're watching that may come up is the investor-owned utilities have expressed an interest in greater ability to finance capital investments, including nuclear energy. That bill hasn't been introduced, but we hear that's coming down the pipe. Dr. Stevens mentioned that there's a bill introduced that would repeal all of Senate Bill 3, which included both the REPS and some utility financing options. We don't think that has any chance of moving in the state of North Carolina, but it has been introduced. So we kind of proactively on a couple issues, and then kind of track other issues to see what's going on.
Yeah.
mean, I guess I'll say this real quickly. I am personally not a lobbyist, but I work with several. Our focus specifically around offshore wind policy has been to put in place a policy that basically targets this manufacturing base that we're trying to attract for the state. So what those manufacturers are looking for is a long-term stable demand for their product, which I think makes sense before they justify an investment in a new facility. So what we've been talking to folks about is a policy that would put in place a significant level of demand with construction requirements staged over a period of time, so you're creating that pipeline that manufacturers need to see. Run this as a public-private partnership with competitive bids coming in, but condition any contract approvals on a demonstration that proposals will result in a net economic benefit to the state. So the opposition, really the opposition to offshore wind is around rate impacts. That's the cost. And so we need to more than overcome that cost with benefits to the state, I think, in order to have a political chance of moving this forward. And with the policy that we've laid out, I think we're able to put ourselves in a position to do that. Nothing's been introduced yet. We have identified sponsors. We will get something introduced this year, so keep your eyes on the legislature. And be sure when something does get introduced, whether you like it or not, call your legislator and let them know what you think, because these people need educating as much or more than the rest of us.
Are you keeping your web pages updated with that kind of information?
Go to Paul's webpage. He would track all that type of legislation.
Great. Yes.
So this is for Paul. So Paul, I see the third-party solar investment going more towards large-scale installations. Didn't hear you say anything about something along the lines of PACE financing for maybe residential. What are your thoughts personally, or is the FDA thoughts about something like PACE financing?
Could you explain what PACE financing is for those of us?
PACE is an acronym for Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a model that has come out of Berkeley, California. In California, the model that they pursue is an individual could receive a loan from their city or municipality, make either a solar or energy efficiency investment in the home, and then they would pay that back over time on their bill, their mortgage. There would be a lien put on their house and they would pay it back monthly. And in theory, what would happen then is that investment would run with the property, and it overcomes the initial investment challenge of the high cost of either doing an energy efficiency retrofit or even a higher cost of doing a PV installation. What has happened last year is at the national level, Fannie and Freddie came in and said, we're not interested in having this lien be on the mortgage. We want to be the top lien on the mortgage. So they basically said they will not buy any mortgages that have this PACE lien on it. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of interest nationally about this model, and Fannie and Freddie basically came in and crushed it. So we certainly like the model, the creativity, and it's my personal thought that someone is going to come out with an innovative financing model that's going to make this stuff work, and that's when we're going to see a lot of it take off. I don't know where it's going to come from. I don't know who's going to produce it. PACE was a very good model to start looking at that. And I just haven't seen anything that's getting the same amount of buzz that PACE was. So it's somewhat unfortunate, and maybe my understanding is that is an issue that has to be resolved in the federal law to kind of pull back Fannie and Freddie, but that doesn't seem likely to happen anytime soon.